On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
I was completely buried in the ruins of the building. Peter Jablonski, the individual, the Jewish boy who was there, decided that he was going to dig me out.
That's the voice of the late Walter Saltzberg of Winnipeg, a hidden child Holocaust survivor from Poland, giving his testimony to the Steven Spielberg Shoah Foundation many years ago. That Saltzberg made it to Winnipeg, where he anglicized his name from Wacek to Walter, and raised a family, had a successful career as a civil engineer in Manitoba, and lived a long life, couldn't have happened without Peter Jablonski, the Polish Jew he credits for saving his life. Walter's family arranged to have him smuggled out of the Warsaw ghetto on his own when the war broke out, and he hid at the home of a non-Jewish doctor for 2 years. But by late 1944, his hiding place was no longer safe. So Walter wandered the streets of Warsaw, which is where he met Peter Jablonski, a blue-eyed Jew whose real name was Nachman Frischberg, aged 23, just 10 years older than Walter. By then, Peter had escaped 2 labor camps and 2 death camps and had joined a local Polish resistance group in Warsaw. And like Walter, Jablonski was the only survivor in his immediate family. The two hid in a building for a few days while Polish resistance troops fought the Nazis. When the Germans bombed this hiding place, Peter dug Walter out of the rubble, and he spent the next 5 months caring for the badly wounded teen, hiding with him and several other Jews in a cramped, lice-infested crawl space which Peter built under a wooden bathhouse. They drank rainwater and lived off a bag of rotten onions Peter scavenged until the Russians liberated the city. Afterwards, Peter continued caring for Walter, arranging for surgery to fix his broken leg, and eventually placing him in a children's home in Warsaw, from where Walter would eventually make it to Winnipeg and join distant relatives who lived there. Peter and his new bride, Sabina, first went to Israel, and they moved to Canada too, where the two fugitives would find each other again years later. Ever since, Walter's family made it their mission to care for Peter, who never had children of his own, and to ensure that his wartime actions were honored. This week, after 80 years, Walter's son George Saltzman is in Israel to attend a special Yom HaShoah ceremony in Jerusalem on Thursday, not at Yad Vashem, but in the city, where B'nai Brith International and Israel's Jewish National Fund will bestow a posthumous Jewish Rescuers citation on Peter Jablonski and 13 other heroic Jews who saved Jewish lives.
I believe that it is part of the story of the Shoah. And because it's such an important part of the story of the Shoah, it belongs with the entire story of the Shoah.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, April 23rd, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
Your father was almost buried in the rubbish. I went out. There was a dog with another friend. And a few minutes later, once the dust settled a bit, you could see it was almost dark. Bricks falling down, I could hear voices. And I could see only one hint of your father sticking out from the rubbish on the bricks.
The controversial issue of why Jews who rescue Jews, like Peter Jablonski did, and whose voice you just heard telling his story to Walter's family, but haven't been honored by Yad Vashem, has long been debated. Yad Vashem says non-Jews had a choice whether to help Jews or not, but the Nazis gave the Jews no choice, and so it would be unfair to judge or reward any Jew for what they did during the Holocaust. Although Yad Vashem does highlight heroic Jewish rescuers in its museum, at conferences, and in research, especially Jewish resistance fighters and partisans. B'nai Brith began lobbying to honor Jewish rescuers more than 20 years ago, and so far, over 600 people have received these alternate official citations. In 2020, Yad Vashem did make Jews who rescued Jews the central theme of that year's state Yom HaShoah ceremonies. Walter's son George has been practicing his Hebrew as he prepares to deliver remarks Thursday when Peter Jablonski gets his citation posthumously. George Saltzberg joins me now. Welcome to the CJN Daily.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It is really amazing to be here in Israel. I think especially now with all that's happened since October 7th, to come to the country, to show support, to be with my family, and especially to honor this incredible man who played a huge role in saving my father's life and the reason that I'm able to speak with you here today.
You've basically made it your life's mission to honor Peter Jablonski, and so this is kind of the culmination, but it took a long time. Tell us a bit about what the challenge was.
Yeah, so I actually had a chance to honor him once with Yad Vashem and the government of Ontario in Toronto. That was several years ago. I had heard about a recognition, for Holocaust survivors in Toronto, and at that time, I sort of made a recommendation. I can't remember if I filled out an application or what I did, and he was one chosen, and it was really beautiful because my dad came, George Mondelbaum, his first cousin, who Peter also saved. And we were all there, together to really celebrate Peter. So we gave him a little bit of, honor, kavod, during his lifetime, which was really, really something that I really wanted to do. And I was pleased to be able to do that.
Okay, so then how did this next sort of Israeli-based honor come about, and why was it such a challenge?
So a distant cousin of Peter's found me once because of all the articles that were written online, about Peter, and then reached out to me. But Doron, his name is Doron, and we stayed in contact. And really, it was Doron who actually knew Avraham Huli, who really is behind this Jewish Rescuer Citation Award, one of the founders of this recognition. The first man who saved my father, Dr. Kazimierz Zviskovsky, was recognized as a righteous amongst nations a long, long time ago. And at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, there is a plaque with his name. And my father also put his name in Winnipeg at the Jewish campus in Winnipeg. The issue was that there was never really an official recognition for Jews who saved Jews. And it was really through Doron, who gave my name to Avraham, who called me and told me about this recognition that was really started in 2011. And, there was, when you talk about Jews saving Jews, some people would say, well, it's expected. It's for people, you expect it. But then they realized that there were Jews who saved other Jews who were not related. They weren't family. They weren't friends. They were complete strangers. And that's where this criteria came. And really, when you take Peter, who was 23, saving the life of a 13-year-old boy who he didn't know, when it was really every man for himself, this is really something to be honored and to be celebrated.
Our listeners will know now that Yad Vashem has, as you said, maybe 28,000 names that it's honored of righteous among the nations who were not Jewish, but there's no similar place or even program through Yad Vashem to honor Jews like this man, Peter Jablonski, who at great personal risk saved not only your dad and then his cousin, but a couple of other guys too for 5 months in a cellar eating rotten onions. And Yad Vashem doesn't do that. How does that sit with you, that you have to have a separate award that's kind of like not in the main stage, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, interesting. And maybe I just don't necessarily look at it that way. I look at them as different organizations that, Yad Vashem really kind of recognized the Gentiles who saved Jews. And B'nai Brith is actually taking the responsibility of recognizing the Jews who saved Jews. And, if you look at the Martyrs Forest, there's 6 million trees planted there in honor of the 6 million Jews who perished in the Shoah. And, there will be his name going on a plaque, I believe, and, a certificate and everything. So in my mind, it is at the same level of recognition as that of Yad Vashem, but just in a different place. Also close to Jerusalem, in the state of Israel. And that to me is is really important.
Would you advocate for Yad Vashem to change their policy?
I agree. It definitely is something that, I would hope that Yad Vashem would reconsider. Because I would love one day when I visit Yad Vashem that I would go by the plaque of the Gentile Dr. Viskovsky, who really took enormous risks to save my father, and also at the same time go by a plaque recognizing Peter Jablonski. I was lucky because I got to know Peter in my life. And, in that one, although both are incredibly meaningful to me, but when you know someone, and Peter was more like a grandfather to me, it would be incredible for me to see him in Yad Vashem.
How did your family reunite with Peter after the war? How did that sort of random thing happen?
So when I used to ask both of them, how did they find each other? Or it was really my father who found Peter. Neither could remember exactly how they knew that. Like, my dad couldn't say how he knew that Peter was there. I was born in 58. My dad came here in Toronto on business in 59. And somehow someone or something had told him that Peter was perhaps in Toronto. In those days, it wasn't so easy to find people. You had to go through telephone books and all kinds of things. Jablonski was a very common Polish name, so there was quite a few of them. And he found them, and they lived on Witchwood Street in Toronto. And Peter would tell the story of how my father showed up with some gifts. And Peter said to him, "You take all of those gifts back, and don't you ever bring me another gift." That's the way he was, Ellen. He used to say to me all the time, "I don't want glorification for what I did." So I'm not so sure he'd be that happy with me with everything that I did after he passed, because on his gravestone in Partis Shalom, I made sure to write, a little, story that really told about how he saved people. I ensured that on his stone at the back, we put a memorial for his parents, his uncle, and his beloved sister. Also in Shaare Zedek Hospital, and all the ambulances, because we had one intensive care unit, 2 ambulances, and the star above above Nursery Dalit at Shaare Zedek Hospital, all has the same thing in memory of both him and his beloved wife Sabina.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
And their love for Israel and love for children.
You said you never had a grandfather because also your father lost, as you said, his whole immediate family. We don't know what happened to your uncle, or could have been uncle, his brother, do we? We know his parents were murdered with a gas, the trucks that they put the tailpipe in. But
yes.
Do you ever find out where they are and where they're buried and where the brother, what happened to him?
This I do not know. There was some thought that they went to Majdanek. We had some paper here in Israel that said they were taken to Majdanek, but I went there with my father and my cousins and also a reporter from CBC many years ago. And we went through they had drawers with names, and we looked through our name. We tried different spelling, but they explained to us that if they were gassed immediately upon coming to to Majdanek, there would be no record, only if they were slave laborers.
So what are you going to say at the ceremony in the Martyrs Forest outside the Scroll of Fire, very evocative place, which I'm sure you've already checked out and seen?
Absolutely.
You did a little reconnoiter.
Right, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm going to speak in Hebrew. And, they asked me if I wanted to do the speech in English. And I said, no, I'm here in Israel. I'm going to do the speech in Hebrew, but also I'm speaking to soldiers and students about this story. So it's really important to me to say it in Hebrew. So, but I'm going to tell a little bit about the story. I'm going to talk about, what Peter did to, at a time where one would think every man for himself, how he really, he didn't think. We used to ask Peter all the time, why did you do it? And he said, I didn't think about it, But he said to me, and he said to all of us a few times, and even in front of my father, I thought we'd be in the hole for two weeks. If I would have known it was 5 months, I have to be honest with you, I'm not sure I would have made the same decision, you know. But nevertheless, you know, he heard my father's cries. He didn't want to leave him. And, you know, one thing that's not in my story is that the other men in that hole really wanted my father not to live. And one time when Peter left the hole and came back in, he found them choking him. And basically, he told them that if they wanted to eat, that they had to leave my father and not hurt him. And then the agreement was made to do the portions or rations into 4, not 5. And Peter shared not only his space, which was meant for his quarter in 2, but his food in 2. And so he basically decided to look after my father through the entire time until the time they were liberated. And even after they were liberated, Ellen, until the time that he heard about the Jewish orphanage. And again, I'm not allowed to use the word orphanage. People get really upset because it was truly a children's home. They wanted to make this a home. The whole goal of this place was not to be an orphanage. And actually, by the way, I'm working, I've been helping with a documentary that's being done on the children's home. And I met yesterday with the 2 producers of this documentary. And because they really wanted to show that this was a true home, tablecloths on the table, you know, clothes that were fitted, you know, not the typical images you have of an orphanage, good food. There was music therapy, drama therapy, sports therapy. There was psychology. There was everything, and was founded by Holocaust survivors who lost their own children. It really is a story that has not been told yet, but that's where my father was. But unlike the other children, he could not play. He could not. He was really suffering tremendously because of his leg.
Tell us the story of how the leg happened.
So he got up. And he went into Dr. Viskovsky's apartment, and he remained there for 2 years without walking outside, without looking outside a window, because you would get 2 kilos of sugar if you found a Jew. And there were risky times when the Gestapo raided the unit, and my father hid underneath the bathtubs in those days, had those, you know, sort of feet at the bottom. And they would have gone. Only the doctor's sister was at home. She wasn't happy about my father being there. She actually tried to convert him to Catholicism or something, you know. And then one day, Dr. Viskovsky was out of the house. It was during the Polish uprising of 1944, with the Russians on the other side of the river. And Warsaw was really being bombed. And what happened was that the sister gave my father 2 cans of sardines. My father went out in the street for the first time. He walked like a duck because he didn't have any muscular tone in his legs. And the bombs were going off, and Polish underground found him. My father used to always say he'll never forget the sound of that bomb. And he was covered in rubble. Peter was near the stairs. So he made it out kind of unscathed, but they're no longer stairs. There's a hole in the ground. There's a bomb. Now, when the bomb hit, my dad was covered. He began to scream, and he was terrified. And he was also in pain. Now, Peter said, I'll hide you if you keep quiet. Now, with a broken leg, my father, 13-year-old boy, had to get out of this now hole. And then he had to meander into this small little entrance underneath the public washroom where he built we're very close to where that house was. And he remained there for 5 months. Peter tied off the wound. He used urine disinfectant because Peter knew the ammonia in urine was, essentially like the best, disinfectant. And he would see the farmers do that to the animals when there were wounds on animals before the Shoah. So that's how he knew about it. And he was an exceptional human being.
Now, your dad made it to Winnipeg, as you said. How he got there is a long story. He couldn't get into the States. Visa wasn't given. So they made it after surgery on his leg in Sweden. They made it to Canada. In Winnipeg, your dad did a lot of speaking about his experiences, I'm told, to like kids and Holocaust speakers. When did he start telling you and your siblings his story?
You know, it's interesting. I'm trying to remember when it was on television, but there was a TV series called The Holocaust. And so, it was one of those things I should actually check, because that's when it all started. I knew I didn't have grandparents. I knew that my dad's um, wore a big shoe because of that. I remember kids staring, and I would be really angry when they'd stare at his shoe. But my dad used to say, so I could kick a soccer ball further. That's who he was,
What happened to the other men after the war? Did they survive?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of them was actually a Jew whose family had converted to Christianity several generations before. But as we all know, the Nazis went back 4 generations. So, it's something I want to tell some of these protesters sometimes, these Jews against genocide and quote unquote, want to tell them that, when they come for us, they're going to come for you too, So the way that the world looks at us, it's the same thing. One of them spoke Russian, which was in the end a miracle because when they were liberated finally, the Russian Red Army had guns pointed. They thought they were Nazis, and he was able to explain to them that they were Jews. But I don't know anything else about those men.
I'm getting this feeling that you don't really want to because of how mean they were to your father and they tried to kill him.
Yeah, Ellen, it's always hard to say, what if it was me? My father was in and out of consciousness. They were terrified that he would yell out in the middle of the night and alert the Nazis, and they would all be finished. And so, he was a burden to all of them, and he was a burden to Peter. Peter could not stretch his legs because my father needed to.
So you've been to the house where this hiding place was in Poland or outside on the street. Have you been there?
I went there with my dad. I have the pictures. We stood there. It was a very emotional time. And it was Peter, before I went to Poland with my dad, who drew all of this for us and told us exactly where everything was. And that's how we found all that stuff. And if I didn't have Peter in my life, I wouldn't be able to complete a lot of the story that I'm telling you today.
You said he was like your grandfather because yours were killed. Can you tell our listeners now if there are any surviving children or?
They love children. They were street. What do they call those parents? On the street, they have a sign in case the kids need the
neighborhood watch. Yeah.
Yeah, that was them. So loving and so incredible. I first met him when I was 13 years old. It was my bar mitzvah present to go to Toronto and Montreal. And, when I moved here to Toronto in 1987 at the beginning, I was young. I wanted to party. I wasn't so interested in my weekends going from Toronto to Thornhill.
To visit where Peter and Sabina lived, yeah.
I guess I matured, and I used to go all the time, and I would sit with him. And he would sit with me, and then really also with my husband, Tim, who's not Jewish. Jewish by osmosis, he always says. Tim wears the chai that Peter had given him before he died. And Peter would tell Tim all kinds of stories as well. So we both had the incredible honor, but together with Sabina's niece, of looking after them until they took their last breath. What an honor it was to be able to do that for someone who'd given my family so much.
It's an amazing story and an amazing thing you've done. We'll be watching. I know there's a live stream that people can watch. We'll put the link. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Ellen.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Peter Jablonski died in Toronto in 2011, just a couple of years after the Ontario government honored him. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, editorial director is Mark Weisblatt, and the music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.